She arrived with grace, but her voice carried thunder. From day one, silence wasn't her strength. The day she entered the house, everything looked perfect. Red dupatta draped neatly over her head, bangles chiming softly as she walked in, her mehndi still fresh, and her smile just right for the photographs. She was beautiful, no doubt. Young, educated, and sharp-eyed, the kind of bride who could light up a room just by standing in it. And when she smiled at her husband, the world paused for a second. But the moment she crossed the threshold of her new home, something else entered too. Not a storm, exactly, but the promise of one. The house was not grand, just a modest, two-bedroom upper portion with old wood, carefully kept. Walls with fading paint, but clean. A kitchen that smelled of masalas and long memories. And at the heart of it all stood the mother, Amy. The woman who had kept the home breathing with her sacrifices, who had cooked without complaining, and prayed for her son more than she prayed for herself. She greeted her new daughter-in-law with sweet, trembling words. "Beta, welcome. This house is yours now." The bride, Sana, nodded with a polite smile, but her eyes scanned the room with a sharpness that didn't go unnoticed, as if she were already measuring what she would change, what needed fixing. That night, as dinner was served, a meal Amy had cooked with aching knees and careful hands, Sana took one bite and set her spoon down. "It's a little too oily," she said, almost gently. Amy smiled. "Next time I'll use less." "I wasn't sure of your taste yet." But Sana didn't look up. She just ate quietly, while her husband looked between them, unsure whether to speak or swallow his discomfort. It started small. That's how storms always begin. Sana didn't like the curtains, too old-fashioned. She didn't like the teacups, chipped. She said it with a laugh, sometimes with a joke, but always loud enough to be heard. And always in the presence of her husband. Amy said nothing. She smiled, nodded, and made mental notes. "I'll fix that. I'll change this. I'll adjust." But silence wasn't Sana's way. She liked talking. No, she needed to talk. Loudly. Assertively. She didn't scream in anger at first. But her opinions were weapons. Sharp-edged sentences that cut without raising a voice. "This kitchen needs a makeover. Why didn't you renovate when Bai started earning? I don't understand why we still keep rice in tins. It's so unhygienic. Why does Amy keep the bathroom slippers inside the bathroom? It's disgusting." Each word, a scratch on old paint. Each remark, a slight twist in the heart of a mother who never asked for thanks, only a little kindness. But to Sana, these weren't attacks. She was just speaking her mind. She had been raised in a household where daughters were taught not to shrink, not to tolerate, not to bow their heads. Sana believed in equality, in confidence, in calling things out. She didn't notice how her words piled up, like wet clothes left in a corner, quietly rotting. Amy noticed. One evening, as Sana laughed on a video call with her friend in the living room, Amy sat on the prayer mat, her back aching, her lips moving silently. Not just prayers, but maybe a plea. "Ya Allah, Sabr Day." Or Isgar Ko Barkara Rakna. That night, her son, Fahad, came to her room. "Amy, Sana feels like you don't really welcome her ideas. She's trying to improve things. Maybe you could meet her halfway?" Amy looked up from her folded dupatta. Her eyes were tired but gentle. "I'm trying, Beta. But Aap log Naya Garbana lo. I've only kept this one standing." He looked at her for a moment, like he wanted to say more. But he didn't. He left quietly. Sana was winning the narrative. Not with lies, but with volume. Her voice filled rooms. Her opinions arrived before her presence. And with each day, Amy's space felt smaller. The storm hadn't raged yet, but the wind had begun to howl. And Amy, the quiet keeper of the house, already knew. Sometimes, the loudest people don't even need to scream. And the quietest ones, they're the ones drowning. She didn't demand much, just respect for the home, not for herself. But even that became too much. Amy never believed in long speeches or heavy-handed authority. She had built her home on habits, not rules, quiet ones that lived between the folds of routine. The dupatta worn while entering the prayer area. Shoes lined neatly by the door. Meals eaten together, not because it was a tradition but because hearts stayed closer that way. She never said, "This is my house. Do as I say." She always said, "This is your house too. Let's keep it peaceful together." But Sanaa didn't notice the difference. Or perhaps she didn't care. The first real crack came over the chai tray. Amy had always made evening tea. 2 cups. Always at the same time. Always with 2 biscuits on each plate. It wasn't a rule. It was rhythm, like sunset, like the azan, like the sound of roti being slapped into shape. But one evening, Sanaa came out of her room and saw the tray on the table. "Why didn't you ask me if I wanted tea?" she asked sharply. Amy blinked, surprised. "Beta, I always make it for you, even if you don't come every day." Sanaa crossed her arms. "But it's rude not to ask. It feels like I'm just an extra cup on the tray." Fahad walked in at that moment. Sanaa turned to him. "See? This is what I mean. She makes me feel invisible." Amy's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray. She didn't reply. She just quietly poured the tea into Sanaa's favorite mug, the one with the gold handle. But something inside her curled. She had never needed to ask, she had anticipated. That was her way. Serve before asked. Care without announcement. But now, even her kindness was an offense. From then on, Sanaa began to question everything Amy had once done quietly. "Why do you wash clothes by hand when there's a machine? Why do you recite the Quran out loud in the living room? I can't concentrate when I'm working. Why do you keep waking up at far and banging the utensils? It disturbs my sleep." Each question came like a challenge. And Amy, who had never seen herself as a jailer of her home, now felt like a trespasser in it. But she still held on to her small, gentle rules. Not to control, just to keep the house from falling apart. Once, she tried explaining it. "Sanaa Beta," she said one morning while folding the laundry, "this house doesn't run on big things. It runs on small ones. Smiling before serving. Saying salam first. Eating together. These are not laws, they're just warmth." Sanaa looked up from her phone and shrugged. But warmth shouldn't come with expectations. "I have my way of doing things." Amy didn't argue. She just nodded. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. Respect for the home, not her authority, not her pride, was all she had ever asked for. A home where you don't walk with shoes on the prayer mat. Where voices stay soft, not because they're afraid, but because they care. Where if dal spills, it's cleaned with love, not with blame. But Sanaa didn't come from such a home. She came from one where freedom meant never being questioned. Where rules meant restriction. Where love was loud and arguments were louder. So Amy adjusted. Again. And again. She stopped reciting Quran in the living room. She knocked on Sanaa's door before entering, even when she just wanted to give her fruit. She started using the washing machine more, even though it made her hands itch. She changed her rhythm. But no matter how she bent herself, it was never enough. One afternoon, Amy asked if the family could all eat dinner together, just for once, like they used to. Sanaa sighed. "Amy, I'm in the middle of a webinar. Why can't I eat in my room? What is this obsession with sitting together?" Amy said nothing. But that night, she didn't eat at all. The table remained set untouched. 3 plates still warm, still waiting. When Fahad found her sitting alone, he asked, "Amy, why didn't you eat?" She looked up, eyes red but dry. "Appetite needs peace, Beta. And I've lost a little of both today." Amy didn't want to rule the house. She didn't want control. She just wanted the home she had protected for decades to stay gentle. To breathe. To feel like home. But now, even her softness was seen as stubbornness. Even her silence as manipulation. Even her rules as control. And in trying not to break her home, she herself began to crack. The sun tried to be the bridge. But sometimes, even bridges burn when flames come from both sides. Fahad had always been the calm one. Not loud like Sanaa. Not silent like Amy. He existed somewhere in the middle, speaking when needed, laughing just enough, and believing, perhaps too naively, that peace could always be negotiated if hearts were in the right place. But hearts, he was learning, could be right and still wounded. And sometimes, even the most peaceful man finds himself in a war he never declared. At work, Fahad was respected, clear-headed, responsible. At home, he was torn. Two women, both important, both loved, both expecting him to understand their silence and their noise. He would come home late, tired, only to find Sana sitting alone in the bedroom, arms folded, sigh heavy. "She didn't say a word to me all day," Sana would complain. "I tried asking her if she needed help in the kitchen, but she just gave me a look." Or, "She put too much salt in the curry again. You know she used to cook better. I think she's doing it on purpose." Fahad would listen, nod, and murmur, "I'll talk to her." And when he did, when he stepped into Amy's quiet room, he'd find her massaging her knees, eyes fixed on the prayer rug. "She's your wife, Beta," Amy would say before he could speak. "Take care of her. She has a new life to adjust to." "But Amy, she says you're cold, distant." Amy would pause, then gently ask, "Does quietness mean distance now?" He didn't have an answer, so he tried harder. He bought Sana flowers after work, took her out on weekends, tried to make her laugh with old college jokes. And he bought Amy her favorite almonds, sat with her for evening tea even when exhausted, asked her how her knees were. He thought he was doing enough, balancing both, keeping both women afloat. But what he didn't see was that they were drifting, not away from each other, but from him. To Sana, his efforts felt like diplomacy, not love. "He never takes a side," she'd tell her friend on a call. "Not even when she stares at me like I don't belong." To Amy, his silence felt like surrender. "He listens," she told her neighbor one day. "But listening without believing, that's its own kind of heartbreak." The house, once filled with warmth, now carried tension in the walls. A dinner would pass with no words. A weekend outing would begin with smiles and end with bitterness. Even the call to prayer seemed to echo longer than it should, as if waiting for someone to answer. One night, as rain tapped softly on the windows, Fahad stood alone in the corridor between two closed doors. One was his bedroom, behind which Sana lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The other, Amy's room, where the light still burned, though she hadn't moved in hours. He leaned his head back against the wall and whispered to himself, "I'm the bridge. I have to hold." But even bridges need repair. And Fahad was cracking. Because every time he defended Amy, Sana pulled away. Every time he comforted Sana, Amy fell quieter. One night, during dinner, Amy served chicken curry, Sana's favorite. She placed the bowl gently near her plate and smiled. "I added less chili, Beta." I remembered. Sana didn't look up. She took a bite, then sighed. "It's undercooked." Amy's hand froze on the edge of the table. Fahad looked at his plate, then at Sana. "It's fine," he said softly. But Sana stood, placed her spoon down, and walked away. Later, in the bedroom, she snapped. "You don't see it, do you? She's always pretending, playing the victim. So you can keep worshipping her." Fahad's voice trembled. "That's my mother you're talking about. And I'm your wife," she shouted. "But you only protect her." He didn't yell back. He didn't defend. He just sat at the edge of the bed and whispered, "I'm tired." That was the night something inside him shifted. The exhaustion became louder than the conflict. He realized he wasn't being a bridge. He was being pulled in both directions, until nothing of him remained. Love is not always enough when it's stretched between fire and silence. Fahad wanted peace. But peace built on pleasing everyone is just quiet chaos. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand. You can love two people deeply and still feel like you're losing both. A broken teacup, a delayed dinner. Every small thing became a battle, and the mother was always blamed. It started with a cup, one of the fancier ones, bone china, with delicate blue roses along the rim. Amy had saved it for guests, but when she saw Sana staring at her phone with a tired sigh that evening, she thought, Let me bring her tea in the prettiest cup today. The tray trembled slightly as she walked, the arthritis whispering through her hands. She reached the door and knocked softly, then pushed it open. Sana looked up, distracted. I brought you tea, Beta. Sana gave a tight smile. Thanks, she said without moving. Amy gently placed the cup on the side table. But as she turned to leave, her elbow caught the edge, and the cup wobbled, tipped, fell, shattered. Hot tea stained the carpet. Porcelain cracked into dozens of jagged pieces. Sana leapt up, furious. Seriously? This is why I don't like people entering my room without asking. Amy froze. I just thought, she began. Do you know how expensive that cup set was? Sana snapped. It was a wedding gift from my aunt. Amy's lips parted, then closed again. She didn't remind her that it was her wedding crockery, packed away carefully for years. She didn't say that she only wanted to make her feel special. She just bent down, slowly, painfully, and began to pick up the pieces with shaking hands. That night, she didn't eat dinner. Fahad asked about it later. Kia hua, Amy? Amy gave a soft smile. Kuptuk gayatha. Uskaduk zayatha, tobuk kam ho gayi. He didn't press. And that was his mistake. Then came the dinner. Amy had cooked late that evening, not out of laziness, but because the meat hadn't defrosted on time. She had called Sana earlier to let her know, even asked her if she'd prefer something else. Sana said it was fine. But when the food was finally on the table, warm naan, mutton curry, and fresh salad, Sana walked in, glanced at the clock, and rolled her eyes. 9:30? This is dinner now? Not everyone has the metabolism of a teenager, Amy. Fahad looked up quickly. She cooked all this herself. Just eat. But Sana continued. I had to skip lunch because of meetings. I can't eat this heavy food at this hour. You should have told me earlier. I did, Amy said gently. Barely, Sana shot back. Fahad put down his spoon. That's enough. The room fell quiet. Amy stared at the roti in her hand for a few seconds, then folded it in half, slowly, and placed it on the side of her plate. Her appetite, again, had left her before the food even reached her mouth. It was always small things. The towels in the wrong place. The TV volume too loud. The spices too strong. The clothes folded the wrong way. The house too cold. Too warm. Too quiet. Too cluttered. And in every conversation, Amy's name surfaced like a guilty shadow. Even in her absence, she was present as the cause. One day, Sana muttered to Fahad, Your mother purposely leaves the windows open. She knows I get migraines. Another time, she keeps watching religious dramas with high volume. I think she does it just to get on my nerves. And the worst, whispered, but loud enough for Amy to overhear one afternoon. She's playing helpless so you'll pity her. She manipulates you through silence. That night, Amy cried while performing wudu, but she didn't speak of it. She never did. Fahad began coming home later than usual. Sometimes he said it was traffic, sometimes meetings. But the truth was simple. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a courtroom. And he, the unwilling judge, didn't know how to pass verdicts on either woman without breaking something. Amy noticed the change. The way he lingered near the gate before entering. The way his smile reached his lips, but not his eyes. She once told him, quietly, If my presence is the reason your marriage is suffering, I can leave, Beta. I've lived my life. Yours has just begun. He looked at her like she had stabbed him. You think this is about you? Amy didn't reply. Because sometimes what a mother thinks is less painful than what she knows. In the end, the house was still standing. The same walls, same roof, same calendar on the wall marking the days. But the air had changed. There was distance now, not just between people but between gestures, between glances, between hearts. And the saddest part? None of it had come from one big explosion. Just 1,000 small accusations like needles, poking, pressing, pushing love out the door, piece by piece. Her daughter-in-law's voice filled the walls. But in her pillow, The mother cried where no one could hear. It wasn't just about words anymore, it was about volume. Sanaa had learned that being loud didn't always mean being wrong. It just meant being heard first. And in a house where silence used to be sacred, her voice became a weapon, sharp and constant. Her arguments didn't wait for weekends. They came with the clatter of breakfast dishes, with the creak of evening doors, with every missed sock, misplaced spoon, or misunderstood glance. And Amy? She absorbed it all like a wall takes in smoke, slowly blackening, never shouting back. One afternoon, the fight was over a simple thing, the laundry. Sanaa came storming out of the bedroom, holding a freshly ironed corda. "It's burnt," she said sharply, waving the sleeve. "Amy, how many times have I said not to touch my clothes?" Amy looked up from her prayer rug, her tasbih resting on her lap. "Beta, I was just helping. The maid didn't come, and you said you had meetings. That doesn't mean you ruined my clothes." Sanaa snapped. "Do you know how expensive this was?" Fahad walked in at the tail end of the sentence, silence falling over the room. Sanaa turned to him. "Say something. Look what she did." Fahad looked at the corda, then at Amy's trembling fingers. "It's just a sleeve, Sanaa." "Oh, right," she said, voice rising. "Always defend her." Amy stood slowly and said, "I'll stitch it for you, Beta. It won't even show."
Sanaa didn't respond.
She just walked away, muttering something under her breath. That night, long after the lights were off, Amy lay on her side, clutching her pillow. Her back ached, but the pain inside her chest was louder. She buried her face in the pillow and wept, not loud, not shuddering, just soft sobs that disappeared into the cotton. No one heard. No one ever did. The next argument was over food. Sanaa wanted Chinese. Amy had made biryani, with effort, care, and saffron she had saved for a special occasion. "Amy, why can't you ever ask what I want to eat?" Sanaa's voice was sharp, cutting. Amy folded her hands gently. "I just thought. Fahad loves biryani. And you made noodles yesterday, so I thought."
"You thought, exactly."
"But you never ask." Amy stayed silent, nodding. Fahad's silence was louder that night. His spoon barely touched his plate. No one said a word. The biryani remained, mostly untouched. After dinner, Amy quietly packed the biryani and left it near the neighbor's door, a widow who lived alone. "Maybe someone else's duo will taste sweeter than my own family's silence," she murmured to herself, wiping her eyes with her dupatta. Sanaa's voice echoed not just in the rooms, but in Amy's head. "You think you're always right. You act like a victim. You're not my mother. Stop treating me like I'm your responsibility." Each word became a splinter. Not fatal, but buried deep. And the worst part? It wasn't always Sanaa's anger that hurt. It was Fahad's helplessness. His lowered eyes. His avoidance. Because when Sanaa screamed, Amy could still tell herself, she's young. She's adjusting. She doesn't understand yet. But Fahad, her son, who once promised to always protect her, his silence was betrayal in slow motion. One evening, Amy tried to break the cycle. She knocked on their bedroom door, a small bowl of custard in her hand, Fahad's favorite. The same one she used to make when he was sick or sad. Sanaa opened the door. Amy smiled softly. "I made custard. I thought." "We're not hungry, Amy," Sanaa cut her off. "And, honestly, stop trying to fix things with food." She closed the door gently, but firmly. Amy stood there for a moment, then turned around. In the kitchen, she placed the bowl on the counter, sat down slowly, and stared at the wall clock. Each tick was a reminder. Time was passing, but wounds were not healing. Later that night, the bowl was empty, but not because someone ate from it. Because Amy quietly poured it down the sink. Outside, the world kept spinning. The sun rose. The birds chirped. The neighbors smiled. But inside the house, the foundation of relationships was quietly eroding. Sanaa's voice had become the soundtrack of the home. Amy's silence had become its background. And somewhere in between, tears flowed, not in tantrums, but in private. On pillows. During wudu. while folding clothes that didn't need folding. Some people think the strongest scream is the loudest. But Amy knew better. Sometimes, the strongest scream is a tear that never gets wiped. He loved both women, but didn't stand for either. And in his silence, one heart shattered. Fahad had always believed that love was enough. Enough to hold a marriage together. Enough to keep his mother smiling. Enough to calm storms, heal wounds, and fill the silences with something warmer than just words. But the truth was bitter. Love, when not backed by action, is like tea without sugar. Present, but never comforting. He found himself caught in a quiet war. Two women, both tied to his heart. His mother, who raised him with hands full of prayer and sacrifice. His wife, who shared his bed, his laughter, and his dreams. And yet he stood for neither. Whenever Sanaa lashed out at Amy, he turned away. Whenever Amy's silence grew heavy, he walked out of the room. Whenever the air thickened with tension, he scrolled on his phone, as if distraction could dissolve damage. But hearts don't heal through avoidance. One Sunday afternoon, the silence finally cracked. The family sat at the table. Amy had made a le coup parathe. They were slightly burnt. She had misjudged the flame while massaging her aching shoulder. Sanaa picked one up, inspected it, and dropped it back onto her plate. Again? Amy, if you're not feeling well, just say so. Don't force yourself and ruin the food. Fahad looked up from his phone, hesitated, then said nothing. Amy lowered her eyes and mumbled, "Next time I'll make them earlier." Sanaa rolled her eyes. "Or maybe just let me cook. It's not a crime, you know." Fahad still didn't speak. Not a single word. After breakfast, Amy quietly returned to her room, the half-burnt paratha still on her plate. That evening, she didn't come out. And Fahad didn't knock. His inaction wasn't malicious, just weak. He thought he was keeping peace by not taking sides. But what he was really doing was letting hurt win in silence. When Sanaa spoke sharply, he excused it as her stress. When Amy stopped smiling, he convinced himself she was tired. When both women pulled away from him, emotionally, mentally, he told himself it was just a phase. But phases don't last this long. One evening, Amy had a mild fever. She sat alone on her bed, a wet cloth on her forehead, refusing to call anyone. Fahad noticed, stood at the door. "Amy, take medicine," he said. She nodded. "Sanaa can make you soup," he added. Amy smiled faintly. "Itnakar lo kamui kadesi kuch banain ki zerorit napade." He didn't get her the soup. He just stood there. Then walked away. Sanaa, too, began to notice his neutrality. One night, she threw her hands up in frustration. She gets away with everything. She manipulates with silence, and you just let her. When are you going to actually speak up for me? Fahad looked at her, tired. "What do you want me to do? Fight my mother?" "I want you to see what she's doing. She's old, Sanaa. She's set in her ways. Just let it go." Sanaa stared at him in disbelief. "So, you'll let me keep breaking while she stays the victim?" He rubbed his temples. "I'm just trying to keep the house together." "No," she said coldly. "You're trying to avoid being blamed." And maybe she wasn't wrong. One night, Amy sat on the prayer mat longer than usual. Her knees hurt, but she didn't get up. Her lips moved, but her eyes remained closed. After Isha, she opened her drawer and pulled out a small envelope, one she had written weeks ago but never had the courage to give. It was addressed to her son. Inside, only one line. "Beta, you didn't have to choose between us. You just had to choose what was right." She never gave it to him. Some truths, she knew, had already been buried under the weight of his silence. The next day, Fahad returned from work to find the house too quiet. Even Sanaa didn't come out of the room. He walked into Amy's room. Empty bed. Folded blanket. Tasbih neatly resting on the pillow. She had gone to her sister's house. No argument. No drama. Just gone. She left a small note on the dresser. "I thought maybe some distance would help the house breathe again.
Don't worry about me."
And for the first time in months, Fahad felt something sharp in his chest. Not because she left. but because she had to leave to finally be seen. He had loved both women, truly, but in loving both, he had forgotten to protect either. And in his effort to be fair, he had been unfair to the one who had needed him the longest. She had served meals with love. That day, her plate was thrown back at her. No one stopped it. It began like any ordinary day. Amy had returned 2 days ago.
Quietly.
Without ceremony. Just walked back into the house with her worn dupatta and even more worn smile. She didn't expect a welcome. She didn't need one. Her home, even if broken, still carried her scent. The masala shelf still bore her handwriting. Her prayer mat still lay folded exactly as she had left it. She went back to her rhythm. Folding laundry. Warming breakfast. Dusting shelves that no one noticed but her.
She spoke less.
Smiled less. But she was there, like the clock on the wall, ticking, even if no one checked the time. On that Friday afternoon, she made a special meal. Not because it was anyone's birthday. Not because she had been asked. But because she wanted to create one peaceful table, just one, where maybe silence wouldn't hurt and voices wouldn't bruise. She made kofte, the kind that melt in the mouth, with soft naan and raita. She even put a small bowl of sliced lemons on the side. Sana liked extra tang, though she never said thank you. She set the table quietly, washed her hands, adjusted her dupatta, and then called out softly, Sana beta, kana lag gaya hai. There was no reply at first. Then footsteps. Sana walked in, arms folded. She looked at the table, then at Amy. Her face was unreadable. Amy offered a small smile. I made kofte. The ones you said you liked that day. Sana sat down without a word. Fahad joined a few minutes later, glancing between them with caution. They began to eat. But after the first bite, Sana frowned. Is this store-bought masala? She asked, her tone flat. Amy paused. I mixed a little. Your fuppo brought some special powder. Sana dropped her spoon. I told you I get acidity from that stuff. Did you forget? Or did you just not care? Amy's hand froze on her glass. Beta, I didn't know. You never listen. Sana snapped, her voice sharp enough to silence the clock. Then, in one swift, heart-cracking moment, she pushed her plate away. It slid across the table, hitting Amy's hand before falling into her lap, spilling oil and gravy onto her clothes. The clatter echoed. Fahad froze. Amy's hands trembled, not from the heat of the food, but from the shock. Her lap, once a cradle for a child, now carried rejection. She looked down at her soiled shower, then up, not at Sana, but at Fahad. Her eyes pleaded, just once. Say something. Stand up.
Stop this.
But Fahad sat still. Not angry. Not shocked. Just still. As if the betrayal had finally numbed him into submission. Amy slowly stood up. She didn't scold. Didn't scream.
Didn't cry.
She walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed, her hands in her lap, still stained with curry. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the plate. It was the moment. The moment when dignity shattered, not by accident, but by choice. Sana later that night complained. She always plays the victim. I barely pushed the plate. Fahad didn't respond. He walked into Amy's room. She was folding clothes slowly. He sat beside her. Amy, I'm sorry. She didn't look up. Don't be, she said softly. It wasn't your hands that shook me today. It was your silence. Fahad's eyes welled, but he said nothing. Amy stood and gently left the room. She didn't lock the door. She didn't pack a bag. But something inside her, something sacred, had been quietly packed away. A woman can forgive a lot. She can forgive raised voices, misunderstandings, even distance. But when the hands that once fed others are punished instead of praised, something changes forever. Amy had spent a lifetime serving with love. That day, her love came back, in a plate full of silence and shame. And the saddest part? No one stopped it. She wrote everything, her pain, her truth, her heartbreak, but never handed it to anyone. The house was quiet again. But this time, It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that clings to walls like cobwebs, sticky, heavy, ignored. Amy had stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped trying. Her presence in the home had shrunk to corners. The prayer mat, the kitchen before anyone woke up, the old wooden chair by the window. That chair became her only companion. Every morning after Far, she'd sit there with a notebook on her lap, a faded spiral-bound one Fahad had once bought during college. She began to write. Not recipes, not grocery lists, but the truth. Line by line, she poured her heart into pages that no one would read. Not because they weren't allowed to, but because no one had ever really asked. To the one who once called me Amy, I never wanted your wife to serve me. I never needed her to wake early or carry tea to my room. All I ever wanted was peace at the table and love in your voice. I did not compete with her. I did not try to win. I only tried to belong. Her handwriting was small, but steady. She kept the tone soft, not because she was weak, but because she knew anger would rot the paper. And she wanted this letter to last. She wrote about the day her shawl was snatched from the clothesline and how no one bothered to ask if she needed another. She wrote about the meals she cooked and how they were returned cold. She wrote about the night she cried into her pillow while the others laughed in the living room. And she wrote about Fahad. My son, I raised you with hands that blistered. I said no to new clothes so you could wear better ones. And yet, you watched as those same hands were stained with food I cooked for love and received an insult. You think silence is safety, but silence, my child, is also betrayal. She didn't blame him. She just wished he had looked at her the way he used to, before marriage, before choices, before loyalty became a battlefield. The letter grew longer. Pages piled up, not with bitterness, but with a longing that begged only to be seen. One day, she folded the last page, placed it inside a plain envelope, wrote one word on the front, Fahad. She held it for a long time in her lap, then quietly walked to his room. He wasn't home. Sana wasn't either. She opened the drawer where he kept his watches, laid the envelope inside,
Closed it gently.
then paused. Her fingers lingered on the wood. She thought of the consequences, not for herself, but for what would follow. The arguments, the denials, the blaming. So she opened the drawer again and took the letter back. She didn't tear it. She didn't burn it. She wrapped it in her old dupatta, the one with hand-embroidered roses, and placed it in her trunk, beneath layers of worn saris and old Eid cards. Safe. Not for now. But maybe someday. Because sometimes, words written in pain aren't meant to be read in anger. They're meant to wait for a quieter heart, a softer time. That evening, Sana asked, Kia Ami Ko Kuch Kana Hai? She's been writing all the time lately. Fahad just shrugged. Maybe she's praying. She was praying, but also grieving. For a family that broke while smiling. For a son who stopped seeing. For a house that once echoed with laughter, now just ticking time. Some truths aren't loud. Some heartbreaks don't scream. They're folded, handwritten, hidden in trunks, waiting for the day when someone finally says, Amy, can I read what you never said out loud? But until then, the letter slept, unread, but never unloved.
One morning, she left.
No goodbye, no luggage. Just a prayer that someday they'd understand. The morning came quietly. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the world outside still yawned in soft blue shadows. Birds hadn't begun their songs. Even the clock on the wall ticked a little slower than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. Inside her room, Amy sat at the edge of her bed. Her dupatta draped over her shoulder just the way she always wore it, not out of habit, but out of dignity. She didn't cry. Not that day. She had cried enough. In whispers. In prayers. In silences that no one respected. Today, there were no tears left. Only resolve, quiet, steady, final. She folded the corner of her prayer mat and placed it gently in her trunk. Closed the lid. Locked it. Slid the key under her pillow. That was all she would leave behind. Memories wrapped in fabric, unsaid things folded between clothes. She didn't pack. Not because she didn't need anything, but because there was nothing left that belonged to her in this house. Not the kitchen. Not the hallway. Not even the bed she had slept in for 30 years. Every space she once owned now belonged to someone else's comfort, someone else's story. She had become a guest in her own home, one whose time had expired. In the kitchen, the kettle still whistled faintly. She had made tea like always for the household, not for herself. A habit she couldn't unlearn, even on the day she chose to leave. The cups were lined neatly on the tray. She hadn't written a note, hadn't left a message. What could she say that hadn't already been ignored? She looked at the photo frame on the living room wall, the one from Fahad's wedding day. Her face was blurry in the background. She hadn't even realized back then that this would be her position forever, present, but out of focus. She stepped out of the house at 6:14 a.m., wearing her old sandals, carrying nothing but her prayer beads. The gate creaked slightly as she opened it. She paused. For a second, hoping foolishly that someone would hear the sound and come running. Ask, Ami Kahanjarahiho? But no doors opened. No lights flicked on. No voices followed. The house, like the people in it, remained asleep. And so she walked, past the neighbor's garden, past the tree her husband had planted years ago, past the bakery where she once bought sweets when Fahad passed his exams. Each step was slow, but firm, because this time she wasn't walking away in anger. She was walking toward peace. She didn't go far, just to the old house of her sister, now empty since her passing. But it held more kindness in its cracked walls than her own home ever did in the last few years. There was no one to welcome her, no one to ask questions, and that, for once, felt like a blessing. She cleaned the corner of the room, spread out an extra sheet, sat down with her tasbih, closed her eyes. She breathed. For the first time in years, she breathed without tiptoeing. Back at home, the day began like any other. Sanaa stretched in bed, annoyed by the sunlight. Ami must have opened the curtain again, she muttered. But the curtain hadn't moved. Because Ami wasn't there. Fahad walked into the kitchen. The tea was there. The cups were there. But the hands that made it gone. He called out, Ami? Silence. He checked the room, the bathroom, even the backyard. Nothing. It was Sanaa who found the missing thing first, the prayer mat folded, the trunk locked, the air too still. Panic wasn't instant. It never is when people think they've got time. But then time teaches you. Sometimes, people don't leave with noise. Sometimes, they leave with peace. And that peace screams louder than any argument ever did. A neighbor said they saw her walking. Fahad asked, but why didn't she say anything? And the neighbor replied gently, maybe she did. Just not in ways you chose to hear. That evening, Fahad sat on her bed. Still made. Still warm. He opened her trunk. Touched her folded shawls. Found nothing but softness. And under the pillow a key. A single key. To the trunk. To the truth. To all the words she had swallowed just to keep the house standing. Some exits don't come with bags. Some departures don't need farewells. Because when a woman leaves not out of anger, but exhaustion, she doesn't take clothes. She takes her soul back. And leaves silence behind, a silence louder than any scream Sanaa had ever thrown across the house. She didn't ask for understanding. But before closing her eyes that night, she whispered, Ya Allah agar kabi samaj a tuas wakt mir dil kadard bi untak pochadina. Oh Allah, if they ever understand, let my pain reach them too. After she was gone, her absence became louder than screams. And finally, her tears were remembered. For the first few days, the house just felt quieter. The kitchen didn't smell like cardamom in the morning. The living room didn't echo with soft footsteps. And dinner wasn't served on time, not because no one could cook, but because no one cared enough to do it the way she did. At first, Sanaa brushed it off. She'll come back when her anger cools, she said. But it wasn't anger that made her leave. It was something colder. Something that builds quietly over the years, ignored sighs, swallowed sobs, and unappreciated service. It was pain that left that morning. And pain, once it walks out, rarely returns. Fahad began waking up earlier than usual, not out of discipline but from habit. He would turn his head toward the kitchen, expecting the sound of her bangle against the teacup, the rustle of her dupatta as she folded the prayer rug. But every morning, the silence answered instead. And that silence began to speak more than Sanaa's screams ever had. One evening, as Fahad passed by her room, the door was open. He hadn't entered since she left. But that day, something pulled him in. Everything was just as she had left it. The cushions slightly pressed in. The edge of the bed still tucked neatly. The scent of rose oil still lingering. And there, on her bedside table, lay something he hadn't noticed before. A small notebook. Its pages worn, edges curled, ink faded. He opened it. I used to think being silent was strength. But silence in this house just made me invisible. They don't hate me. They just don't see me. Today, she said, I delayed lunch on purpose. I didn't even eat that day. Page after page were the tears she never cried in front of them. Pain written in a soft, shaky hand. Not for revenge. Not for sympathy. Just to breathe, somewhere. Fahad sat there for hours. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't wipe the tears rolling down his cheeks. Because for the first time in years, he heard her. Not her voice, but the ache beneath it. Not her words, but the silence that followed them. Sanaa entered the room around sunset. What are you doing in here? He didn't answer. He simply handed her the notebook. She read a few lines.
Scoffed.
So now she's the victim? But something in Fahad's eyes stopped her. This isn't about blaming you, he said softly. It's about realizing we both were blind to the only person who never asked anything from us except respect.
Sanaa didn't reply.
Not that day. Because guilt doesn't speak loudly. It creeps in slowly, then all at once. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Still no news from her. No message. No phone call. Nothing. Fahad went to every relative, every neighbor, every old friend of hers, hoping someone knew where she had gone. Finally, an old uncle told him. She's staying in her sister's house. Alone. Doesn't say much. Just praise. Fahad went the next morning. He stood outside for a long time before knocking. When she opened the door, her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. He knelt down, tears in his eyes. Ami muimaf kardu. Mother, forgive me. She touched his head, the same way she had when he was a child with a scraped knee. I wasn't angry, she whispered. Just tired. He begged her to come back. She smiled. It's not my house anymore. My time there is over. He offered to take care of her. She said, I don't need care. I just needed kindness, when it mattered. Back home, Fahad didn't argue with Sanaa. He didn't shout. He simply placed her teacup himself, folded his mother's dupatta, and sat in the kitchen quietly. One day, Sanaa said, I didn't know she felt all that. And he replied, that's because we never asked. Months later, when Ami finally returned, not to stay, but just to visit, she found her room clean, her bed made, her prayer rug waiting, and her daughter-in-law standing in the doorway, quietly. No apologies were exchanged. No dramatic hugs. Just eyes lowered, voices soft, and one sentence from Sanaa that said more than any sorry could. Chai bana dun, Ami? And for the first time, her voice didn't thunder. It trembled. In the end, her tears didn't need an audience. They needed space. And that space, once created, allowed everyone to grow. Her absence was a wound, but it also became a mirror. Because sometimes, people don't understand your worth when you speak. They understand only when your silence walks out the door and never returns.